All right. Hello, WriteHive Conference 2024, and welcome to WriteHive Conference 2024. You are at Bringing Writing to the Table with TTRPGs, that is Tabletop Role-Playing Games. I'm Hannah Cates. I'm here with the indefatigable Matthew Phillion, and we are going to be talking about role-playing games, writing, how they connect, how the different disciplines feed into each other. If you guys have seen me around, I appreciate it. Hannah Cates again. I am an author, editor, best-selling ghostwriter, and also a resident editor here at WriteHive. And let Matthew introduce himself as well.
I was gonna say I've always wanted to be called indefatigable. Indefatigable. That was like, oh, I've been waiting for that one word to be used in my name at some point in my life. So check that off of the list. I am Matthew Phillion. I am an author, writer, journalist, and frequent game master, and someone who's brought the two together a lot in my career. So I'm looking forward to this conversation a lot. This is one of my favorite things to talk about.
I am so excited to talk about this too. I am a very recent game master, like within the last 2 years. And I want to thank you all the good people at WriteHive for letting us do this. Cause like I suggested this and you guys jumped on it. Appreciate you guys. So and Matthew, like just looking at your backlog and your catalog and your career, you have done so much between you're a professional game master, you write about tabletop role-playing games, but you also have your own series of books that are fantastic. I was just looking and read into a few of them. So I would love to talk to you opening up about tabletop role-playing games as a writer, what the benefits are, how you can really dive into the story, and why, if you are a writer, you might want to explore some TTRPGs.
One of my favorite things anybody's ever said about it is Patrick Rothfuss during a game when he was playing D&D on a podcast. He says if you play role-playing games, you're halfway to being an author. If you game master one, you're three-quarters of the way to being an author already because you're using a lot of the same skill sets. And I'm like, he's not wrong. I mean, there is that, there's that other 25% of the discipline to sit down and actually get the manuscript written, but you're using a lot of the same brain pieces at the same time for gaming and because it's all, at the end of the day, it's all storytelling.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, for those of you who aren't, I assume everybody who's tuning into this may have some experience with TTRPGs, but if you haven't, a tabletop role-playing game is something like Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Vampire the Masquerade, Call of Cthulhu, that incorporates both a storytelling interactive element, but also a statistical mechanic. So if there's a chance that you could succeed or fail at something, you're going to roll the dice, which is where you get that iconic D20. But you think of Dungeons and Dragons or other TTRPGs being like very crunchy, mathy games. I was so surprised playing for my first time. I'm like, oh, this isn't like a bunch of math at all. This is literally storytelling.
It's improv in a lot of ways. It's a first draft of any story you tell, or what I like to say is like it's everything that you worry about when you're alone at a manuscript. You don't actually get to worry about because it's out of your hands. Depending on what game you're using, the mechanics will give you it's fate really. You're rolling a die or and you're riffing off of other people because almost I mean there are solo games or games that you can play with one other person, but for most of them are built to have a bunch of people around a table. So that loneliness or that solitude of being an author is out of your hands. Some people may not like that. Some of my favorite authors that I'm friends with can't play TTRPGs because they're too much of a control freak. They flat out told me, I'm like, I invited them on. I was a DM for a D&D podcast for 2 seasons. And I was like, oh, I'd love to get you on like as a guest. And one of my favorite authors is like, if I can't control the story, I can't do it. So, but for others, like, because isn't that what happens? We get all locked into ourselves, right? Like, and as authors, it's this freeing moment of like, oh, the die said this is what happens. This is what we're gonna do.
Yeah, you literally have to let go, and you don't like I DM a lot for for middle graders. And that it's very difficult when you roll that, you think that the story should go one way. There's an epic, slash to defeat the monster. You want to you have this go for broke amazing plan to charm somebody or deceive somebody. That low roll just ruins everything. And it's devastating, but it's also, I think as a writer, it's been really valuable because I get to that point, like either in my outlining phase or in my writing, where the story is like, I'm so stuck on this vision in my head, I can't imagine it going any other way. And what's cool about like TTRPGs is that it always goes another way. Plans always fail 100% of the time, maybe like 95% of the time. You It really gets you past that. You have to get past that block. And a lot of times it's with a zany or wacky or completely unexpected turn of the story that gets you past that point. And it can kind of encourage me personally to open my mind to be like, okay, I think in my mind I've told myself that it has to go that way, but what if the
Yeah,
character failed? What if that didn't happen? What if this took a completely new direction?
yeah, that the term I hear a lot is failing forward. Like, and this is kind of, it's sort of how you play. I mean, I'm old enough that I've played with the grumpy old men that are like, no, that something bad happens, you die. But I'm a theater kid. I'm an improv guy. I'm a writer. I'm a cartoonist. Like, no, if you roll bad, let's make it part of the story. Let's make it fun. It's not punitive. Like, and I actually say that especially when I'm playing with new players, I'm like, it is okay to roll bad. That helps the story. Like, that helps um tell a more interesting story. Success is fun, but it's more fun if you can get if it's work to get there.
Oh,
Um
absolutely. I actually just wrote a blog about this. It's if you always succeeded, if there was always that nat 20, if everything always went well, there would be, and I think this is a problem that I've seen personally with modern storytelling, is just when there's a lack of stakes and there's
mhm.
a lack of tension and you're not holding your breath as you make that role, or you're not holding your breath as your character does that risky thing or chooses the door to walk through over the other door. There has to be some sort of stakes and consequence. And when you're role playing, I mean, that is decided by the dice. It's a lot harder, I think, in the theater of the mind for a writer to let yourself take that risk. But it's the risk and the sometimes the reward, sometimes a loss that makes the story rich and actually establishes the stakes and the pacing.
Yeah, I play with a lot of people that love when something bad happens to their characters. Like they really go like they enjoy tragedy. And so that sort of takes away some of that fear because a lot of times, like especially if you're writing a novel, you're setting it in stone. Like as you're laying the train tracks down, as you're setting it in stone. With games, that I can't count the number of times I said, "Well, I guess this is happening," because the players have decided to do something, and I'm like, I had a whole thing that was going to happen. And okay, we're going to go in a completely different direction. That is totally fine. You're getting on a boat and leaving the country. I mean, there was a dragon around the corner for you to fight, but we can leave the country. That's cool. And that happens all the time. And that actually, I think that's one of the differences between storytelling through games and writing on your own. It's um you do actually need a structure when you're writing a book. But gaming will actually let you kind of be free of that. Like it's okay to be unstructured and you can just see what happens when you blow the dandelion and see where the pieces fly in the air. Um, and and one of the things that I love the most about it is, I love when writers say, "Oh, I didn't expect my characters to do that." Like, well, your characters all really actually live in your head. Like you didn't expect yourself to do that, and that's a surprise. But I always say you want to be real surprised when other human beings control the characters in your story and will have their own agency and their own decision making. Now see how much of a surprise you're in for as a narrative designer, as a storyteller. If people are going to do their own thing and
Oh,
react to your environment.
yeah. Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, and you know those exercises, those like get to know your character exercises where you ask them all these, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite flavor of ice cream? What is your star sign? Yeah, you want to get really wild, like put your character in, and I have done this actually with characters that I've been struggling with. I have made them very loosely into a D&D character and
Mhm.
kind of adopted with that role play. Okay, I'm going to try to act, how I think that character is going to act. And I'm going to and being put in situations where it's like, oh, are we going to burn down this orphanage like cheese and crackers? I did not expect this to go so serious so fast. Like, my book is about a girl who's a shopaholic, and now we're talking about burning down an entire building. Like, this is a lot.
Why is
But
it always an orphanage? It
it's
seems like
always an
that.
orphanage. I do not know why. But and I had another player comment afterwards. He's like, "Wow, your character got real dark real fast." I'm like, you know what? I have to internalize this for my writing because I did not expect this character to get this dark this fast. But yay, it happened. And it gives you a very safe, you get those curveballs from other
Mhm.
players, from the DMs. It gives you a very safe, really no consequences, right? It's a very safe, very risk-free way to explore your character, what motivates them, what stoppers them, what, if they get into this really high stakes situation, what would they do? Do they think that they're the good guy? Why or why not? I
That
was very surprised my character started committing more crimes, but then I thought about it and I was like, well, that's what they would do.
it's what I love too is the longer you play, you start to much like a writer, you start to realize themes in your what kind of characters you're exploring, what kind of like what am I trying to get out of this? And we do this as writers. Like, what am I trying to get out of this by writing this manuscript? What am I trying to get out of this from this game to what themes, what's wrong in my own head that I'm trying to learn about. I mean, I know there's that warning, like, do not use your game as therapy. Your DM is not a trained therapist. Well, he might be, but he probably isn't. Like, but I always find conversations interesting. Like, what's the thing that you can't get away from as a character or as a GM? I did have one player say, could capitalism not be the bad guy in the next campaign? I'm like, I don't know if I can do that, but I'll try. Um, it'll be a metaphor somehow, but you start realizing after a couple of years, I'm like, oh, this is what I'm working through. This is where my brain goes as a writer, and it's a great testing ground. It's your test kitchen for your inevitable novel.
Yeah. Oh, I really wish you wouldn't call me out like that, but I do appreciate it. That makes you a good friend. It does help. You are in a, and I love that you use the word freedom. I love that you use the word freedom because when you are writing, there's inherently whether you're indie publishing, whether you're traditional publishing, there's some sort of pressure. What am
Mhm.
I going to do with this? Is an agent going to like it? How am I going to market it? How does it fit into market? Yada yada yada. What I really loved for the first time playing Dungeons and Dragons and absolutely falling in love with it was like, oh my gosh, here's a place where we can write, we can be creative. I can do this with my friends, and there's literally no pressure.
Mhm.
Like, there's no submission. And I think as a writer, it's helped me be more productive, more true to myself, and even amplified my writing because I can explore themes and plot devices in my games that it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I just wrote 20 pages and this is all a waste. Like, oh, okay, I'm a little stuck here. Why don't I subtly like put this into my game and then like see how my players react?
Oh yeah, the,
It's
the amount of world building that I steal from my games too. It's like, do I like this city? Okay, we're going to just lift it up out of the ground and stick it into a novel, or and it's funny because freedom is a big part of it, but also no matter what game you're playing, there are parameters, and those parameters can help you. Like they're the Lego blocks for you, right? Like instead of sometimes you get too much freedom as an author, right? Like I get to build a whole world. It's if day one. Look at me, I'm building a whole world. 2 years later, oh my God, my notebooks are full. I've done too much, and it's
I haven't written a word.
yeah,
I'm
this
still napping.
all I'm doing is building out the Bible for the book.
Exactly.
Um, and I always joke. I actually say the same advice for new writers as I do for new GMs. Like, don't build the whole world yet. the reader isn't going to see the whole world. The players aren't going to see the whole world. Build what you need and build out from there, and sort of like concentric circles. That way you don't overdo it, because in both mediums you can get real bogged down. Like, I don't need 1,000 years of history yet. 1,000 years of history will be cool later, but we don't need that just yet. Like, tell me about down the street first.
Well, dude, that's amazing advice too, because I know I've been running a campaign now. My longest campaign, it's almost reaching a year and a half, which is
Mhm.
the longest campaign I've ever run. Um, the players inherently change it. Like I'm GMing, I'm running this world, and my first campaign, I was like, oh, here's the magic. Here, well, D&D has its own magic system, but like here are the gods that are involved. Here's the political system, and yes, like there is evil capitalism.
Yeah.
Here's what's going on in the world. Here's what's going on in each city. And my players are like, they're awesome. They are so great. I totally thought I want the game, the whole overarching story was going to go a very specific way. But then the characters started interacting with the world, and I realized, like, oh, and if you can't tell, I'm actually an obsessive plotter. I love plotting. I did a last debate last year about plotting. Love me some plotting. But really, like TTRPG has opened my eyes to, okay, you also have to give give characters, give players, give your story a chance to breathe. As they interact, the players were making decisions, they were bringing up things from their backstories. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't have thought of that. This is way better. It's not
Mhm.
just me dictatorially creating this world and say, oh, you guys all have to do this and this and this. It's really, and I think when you're a game master, sometimes it feels like it's you versus your players, or like you're being a bad guy trying to punish them with an especially hard monster. But really, you are all working together to
Mhm.
tell this epic story. And when that happens, and I give my players the freedom to to interact with their own characters, it's taken the story to heights that, I mean, I did not imagine.
I I used to, when people would get stuck, I would give them like remember the old 25 questions as the theater kid kind of thing, like, and I'm like, okay, this is more than the average person wants to do. So I usually just ask 3 questions, and I'll use those to build it. And like, I have like my conspiracy wall for when I'm working on a book. Like, I use sticky notes, and I like for chapter headers and stuff, and I move things around, like obsessively structured for stories. And what the games have done, I'm like, I never plan one more than one game ahead, because I don't know what anybody's gonna do. Like, right before this, I was asking the people that I DM for on Wednesday night, I'm like, where are you going tonight? Like, I'd like to pull out some maps. Like, are you leaving the city? Are you going into like, what do you do? Like, you should just give me some idea of which car you're getting into. So like,
Yeah.
like a worried parent. But letting go of like having no control over what's going to happen. And I get the best story ideas from, like, I ask questions. I stole them from another professional DM, actually. I think it's, um, why are you with these people? Like, you need a reason to be there. What's the one secret that you would what's one secret you would cross your greatest moral line for? And how have you wronged someone in your life? And that the stuff I get from just those 3 questions that help me build a story, and it's an audience of 4 to 6, 8 people. Like, you're not building for an audience of thousands or hundreds of thousands like you would with a novel. Um, you're not worried about marketing. You're not worried about like hitting the 4 quadrants of like the audience. Like, it's for these people at this table. Let's build a story. So I ask them a couple questions, and then I build a story around them and the stuff I get from what they want. Because what you're learning is I have things I want to explore as a writer.
Mhm.
What do you as players want to explore? What do you want to learn about yourself? What do you want to learn about the world? That and then that gives you the structure. It's that 1-2 punch of the freedom of the dice roll and open storytelling versus, here's some parameters to work with. Um, and that 1-2 punch of structure and unstructure is such a good training ground for getting ready to write a novel.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and this was the crux of the article that I just wrote. It was rules lawyers versus rule of cool. And I was arguing for both sides. I said,
Mm.
you have to have, and this is why I think TTRPGs are also so wonderful for exploring story mechanics, right? You
Mm.
have to have parameters. If you do not have zeros and ones, light and dark, there's no tension. If there's no chance that your character can fail, then why are we holding our breath? What questions are we wanting answered as we turn the page? As readers, like, you fall into the trap of the Mary Sue, and
Yep.
that, oh, my character is perfect and their strength score is 16, their intelligence score, they're a
Oh yeah.
barbarian, bard, sorcerer, vampire, and their eyes turn red when they get angry, and they have a +9 to every hit. It's like, well, okay, this character, I get it's cool, but it's not fun. It's
But
not
I
fun. It's not engaging if you don't have those parameters and rules, which, like I said, are the dice in the game. But as a reader, or excuse me, as a writer, it has to be that chance, that
Mhm.
tension, and those mistakes that your character makes along the way and uses to grow.
It's one of the it's funny because depending there's always different arguments about which system is the most fun, but everybody's got their different flavors. But people often complain like I don't like being pigeonholed as this one type of like, oh, I'm a wizard so I'm smart and physically weak. I'm like, that gives you some parameters so that you can fail and succeed in fun ways. Like I always say, like I want one thing I'm real bad at. If I'm making a character, give me something that I'm absolutely terrible at. Give me something really good at so I can feel good and heroic and I can absolutely pooch a roll and know I'm just and that's what but and thinking about years later what you talk about. You don't talk about you sometimes talk about the big successes, but really what you talk about the most are the natural ones, the places you bombed where real story and real fun happens. Um those are the stories that we tell years later. Like remember when you did that thing and you fell in the lava pit and we had to like fish out your skeleton and resurrect you. Oh yeah, that was the funniest thing that ever happened. Those are the things you talk about. Very even like the critical successes of stories, like you don't talk about those as much as the stuff when you absolutely made a doofus of yourself. The Mary Sue thing, I wish I could credit the cartoonist who did it because it's a brilliant cartoon. And it was like, my character is this world famous elven archer. She has wild auburn hair and glowing green eyes and rides a griffin. And like the cartoon is like this elegant, awesome, like cinematic. And then it goes session one and it turns into like stick figures and like this and it's just and like the pointy ears on the side of like a very round head. And she goes, what's up? And like and it's like so like you get this big epic thing, and then here's the reality of it is like but you're gonna have more fun being having those flaws like and that I think that helps make you a better storyteller too because you get used to
And
using
100%, 100%. And I love that you said like the flaws make the character vivid. They're often the funniest, most endearing parts of the characters. And if you don't have, you were talking, I loved your three questions, so I want to go back to those because I immediately when you said you started naming them off, I'm like, oh, that gives the character agency. Oh, that gives the character a tragic wound. That gives a character a motivation. Like you, that's such a masterful thing that subtly as a DM, you're encouraging your players to create characters with motivation. What are their goals? Why do they want to do this? With agency, what kind of powers do they have? What kind of decision or what in their head even how they understand their own agency. Do they think that they have power? Do they think that they have the abilities? And then also that, that secret that they would cross their moral lines for, or how they've wronged somebody. Like, oh, you also have a past and you are influenced, your character is inherently influenced by the things that have happened to them, how they've been raised. They have that, emotional feedback loop that's directly filtered through their, wonderful and or tragic backstories.
and you
It's
can throw those things. I actually, I forget, I remember which DM I stole that from. I should actually give credit. I modified them to be more general for my own campaign, but the original three were from Jerry Holkins, who is the DM for Acquisitions Inc., the C team, and he's the writer for Penny Arcade. But I he shared those during the podcast. I'm like, oh, those are good, and I don't use them for my own characters when I write. I use them to help as writing prompts for players who need help developing, and then that also helps because what they give you back as the GM is like, oh, okay, so there's a moral line where I can give them that moral line, and will they cross it? And then the player agency, have they decided in that moment where there's that one, what's the one thing you could learn that you would commit murder for, or you would betray your family for, whatever your, and I let the player decide what their greatest moral line is, because it's easy to say like, what would you kill to know? I'm like, what would you do? Like maybe your character who would never kill, but what would be the one thing that you would cross your own personal greatest moral line for to learn, and then you put that in front of them as a GM and see if they put their foot across that line, or do they actually show a moment of sort of character development, or like, no, I won't. I can live without that knowledge, or I can live without that power, or whatever it is that they're looking for.
You force the character and you organically put it in the story to understand the difference between their wants and needs.
Hmm.
And that's the crux of a hero's journey. That's the crux of a character arc, is going out because you want something. And of course, this is how life works. We go out, we want something. We end up discovering through great pain and trial what we need, whether we get the thing that we wanted or not. But and I love how you put too, like whether they take that secret or not, whether they say yes or no. Both are, if you are on a positive character arc or a negative character arc, that these choices, the players get the choices. And then I love as a DM, like, oh my gosh, I love it when I do not expect that. Like, oh, I'll put a moral choice in front of them and I just did not expect it to go that way. And I get it thrown back in my face. And I'm like, oh, wow, well, okay, we're going this way now. And with the improv part, you really are thinking on the fly. You hope one thing, but then when the story starts unfolding the another way, you you have the encouragement and the wherewithal to explore parts of your plot that you never thought you'd be exploring, the dark, creepy basements of your houses.
I'm laughing because I have a lot of folks that I play for who they'll take every bargain with the devil or with a witch in the woods that they can, like, they never say no to a deal with some extra planar being. And it's so funny that to the point I threw, like, a deal with the devil in front of them fairly recently, and I actually had to have like an actual fiend from another plane go, I'm gonna need to get back to you on that, because I didn't expect you to ask to make that big a deal. I need to consider the legalese on my end. And like, I had to go back as a narrator and be like, I don't actually have anything awful to offer them. I have to think about they were like, please take my soul. It's just like, wow, I don't actually, okay. And I think that, I mean, the funny thing with games is you're thinking on the fly, and you can't hold please things if you have to, like, hold please, let me figure out
Yeah.
what kind of bargain to do here.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Completely. Yeah. Unexpected. Did not expect you to do that. Did not expect you to sell your souls. But oh, but then you're thinking, like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, wow, why are their souls value so low?
I
What
think
is your party doing?
I actually think people are, it's because there's the players who never want anything bad to happen to their characters, but I think a lot of times with games, it's an opportunity to, um, in a way that you wouldn't do in a novel, because it's sort of unchangeable.
Yeah.
But you can make some poor life choices in a game, because you're like, well, what's the worst that happens? I roll up a new character, or I'll do better next campaign or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think the level of risk is actually, I think people, once they learn what comes from making big swings, they become more fun to play with too. And I think you can take that into narrative storytelling on the writing side too. God, I've had those sorts of like big swings, because when I was DMing for the Ravenfall Institute podcast, at least once per story arc, I'm like, oh, I have no notes for what I'm going to do. You're going to alter the course of the story that I am telling, and you just changed the narrative that one of your co-players had set up for herself. I'm like, and it's doing the check-in, like, is she okay with that? Like, okay, no, she's laughing, she's into it. Okay, this is gonna change the whole story arc. Um, and it's just good practice for when you're sitting at the desk by yourself going, this is a good spot for a big swing. This is a good spot to take a risk and see if it completely changes the story that I'm telling, and if it's worth it.
Well, Matthew, how do you, like, both as a game master and a writer, how do you handle those big swings? How do you, because like here's how I think a big swing happens in the writing world is when, and I have to deliver a lot of this stuff as an editor. It's a
Mhm.
sad part. I've had authors flip me off. I've had authors cry. I've had authors yell at me. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this. I thought it was going to go this way and now it's going to go this way." It's a big swing. It's the
Mm,
unexpected. Like, oh, hey, you thought, okay, it needs to be rewritten in third person. Or this whole entire character, like I talked a lot with this, about this with Justine. She had a whole character that she'd written that had to go. And she
mm,
like, we were talking on a podcast. She had pushback against her editor, like, oh, these are the reasons that I need this character. But ultimately, she agreed with the editor. I gotta cut this whole entire character. That's a big swing. So
mm.
how do you, as a game master and as a writer, develop resiliency in your writing and your storytelling to where you can really, get not just taking the big swings, but also like kind of like vibing with them, getting into them, relishing
That's
them?
on the it's funny, it happens less with me on the writing side because I take the big swings in the note phase. Like I plot everything out so far in advance that like I'll waste weeks of note taking, but I won't actually waste weeks of like sitting down to write. I'm like, oh, and one of my funny, it's not even like a cool thing. I wrote one of my books, Echo in the Sea. It's like a modern Atlantis myth and magic kind of thing. And I was determined I wanted a sea lion in there. Echo was going to have a sea lion friend. I had a plush sea lion on my desk for inspiration. And after trying to write the word pinniped 3 or 4 times, I'm like, you know what? We're not making the animal companion mistake that I've made before. Like, if it can't talk, you're gonna forget it's there. It's gonna be in every scene. You're gonna have to figure out how a thing with flippers is running around on the deck of the boat. Like, it's just dumb. And like, I had the whole subplot with the sea lion. I'm like, just pull it out. Not a major plot point, but it was one of those ones where it's like, it's not even kill your darlings. It's just consider the bigger picture. When it comes to the game table, I just I don't plan because I know the players are going to go. I'll have a thing that I want to have happen, but you almost kind of like hang a lantern down the end of the hall and hope you get there, but leave the whole hallway dark to see what you trip over, um, because I'm not. I do. I'm lying. I was gonna say I don't take big swings as a DM because I want the players to take them, but even just this past couple of days, I threw something at the players where I saw someone figure it out before it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I see his face and he just goes, "Oh, F you." Like he saw what was that, like literally just cussed me out on camera, like, "Oh, you." And then everybody else, like, what's happening? And I'm like, that my big swing was I've been waiting for you guys to get there for 4 months. Like I had hung that lantern and that was my big swing. And if they never got there, and this is the fun thing with games, particularly more so than books, that you can save that for later. There's stuff that I've run 2-year campaigns and nobody's ever found it. I'm like, that's okay. They'll find that thing in some other story, and I can because nothing is worthless. You put it in you put it in your like notes drawer, and like, oh, I need a big bad for this scene, or I need a quirky wizard who talks like Merlin from Sword in the Stone. Just you can just keep that in your back pocket, and if they never find it, they never find it, and you can save it for later, and that's or you don't use it in the game, put it in your book.
No, and it's like, I mean, I always talk about my files when I'm writing. I have a file for every book called The Island of Misfit Toys. So it will be The Island of Misfit Toys, this book, The Island of Misfit Toys. I don't delete anything when I draft.
Mhm.
And I don't delete anything. I've done this when I'm planning notes, when I'm DMing too. I put it in the Island of Misfit Toys because you never know when you're going to be able to recycle it or reuse it. I've had a scene that I loved that I ended up cutting in one of my books that I ended up it it needed its own book, so I ended up writing a whole new book after that, and it became its own thing. So I love that you said like it's not a waste. It's never a waste. And if it's not, I tell this to my editing clients too. Just because it doesn't fit here doesn't mean it can't fit. Just because it's a no now doesn't mean it's not going to come back better
Mhm.
later. It's not a no, it's just it's not a good fit right here.
And that was actually my first book series was a whole bunch of misfit toys because I had been writing short stories. It's just my first book series wasn't fantasy; it was superheroes, but the characters were all built using a originally from using a superhero game system anyway. So it was sort of like just it was just idea generation. And I'm like, one of these will be the lead character in a book, and eventually I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna empty out the toy box, see which ones look cool together. And to this day, I've still got this box of character concepts that's there if I need to pull one. Um, I literally rummaged through the junk drawer, like, oh, that one looks cool with this one, and these two could tell a good story together if I put them side by side. And the same thing works with TTRPGs. You've got if you play long enough, you end up. Does that running joke? How, how many character sheets do you have sitting somewhere that you've rolled up because you were bored and you just rolled up a new character? Like, oh, a couple hundred, like everybody's got just a box full of characters to use, um, or a box full of plot points or uh, character inspirations. And so nothing is wasted. It's you had a character die tragically to like a goblin pizza kitchen blowing up. What else you got? You got to have something else. Like, and whatever your character didn't get to in that arc, you can save those ideas and that inspiration for future stories. Just save everything.
Well, and when you it gives you the chance to explore like when you feel the sadness or the tension that I'm playing a character right now in a Spelljammer campaign that I love, and I love her backstory, and I love where she's going, and I love how her character has been, and that she almost got pummeled to death by GIF warlords the other day, and I was like, well, you still I still have that concept. I still have the motivation. I still have the agency. I still have that character development.
Mhm.
Like nothing, this poor character dying tragically. Yes, it's very tragic, but also what you learn as a storyteller, as a player, I think is just as much as when I'm GMing and putting the playing God with all of these characters.
I was thinking about that the other day of what the, there's something fascinating as a storyteller about the lost potential.
Mm.
Like what could have been is as much of an interesting story as what actually does happen. If and a game is a chance to play with that sort of storytelling mechanic in a low risk way. Because if you kill off a character in a book where people don't come back from the dead, or anything along those lines, a player stops showing up and their characters, that actually has happened a few times where some life changes and somebody has to walk away. I'm like, oh, we never got to I'm running. I usually do my own narratives, but as an experiment, I've been running Wilds Beyond the Witchlight, um, which is a delightful little fairy tale. But one of the players had to bail very early on, and I kind of just took what I was going to have him encounter and let the other characters see it and and realize, oh, this was the story we would have gotten had so and so still been here, and just letting that missed potential be part of the tragic story and using that as a storytelling element all on its own. And it is kind of low risk. You can always save those things for later, or you can use them for emotional highs and lows for the characters who are there. And I think I mean it happens for novels. You got to be a little bit more. You got to pick your punches of where those moments are where the lost potential is going to happen. But with games, it's sort of like it's like kinetic, like that's energy that can be stored and used later if you don't end up using it in a game when you intended to. It happens all the time.
And that's such a good point that it is. I love that kinetic. It's flowing. It's happening in real time. It's very organic, low stakes, organic. Play it out. Not as much, when you're writing, and it is more static. It is more,
Mhm.
hey, I always think of I spend like the next 2 hours after running a game or after playing a game. Oh my gosh, my character should have done this instead of this, or what if this, or what if, but you can't change it. The die is rolled, fate is cast. You're in that reality. Whereas I know with whatever I'm writing, I can go back and I can edit it 3,000 times and change it whatever I want.
There
More
is the rewriting. There is the rewriting thing. You don't get to rewrite the game. It's both very free and very set in stone because you can't take memories out of people's heads. You can delete an entire chapter. You can delete an entire character in a novel, and nobody will know but you and maybe your editor if they got a chance to see it first. And it's uh, that's a little that's almost more free than gaming. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. Just take this whole scene out. Whereas with the game, you can't steal people's memories. It happens, and it's history for shared history between friends.
Well, I don't know if you're a gamer, if you play Baldur's Gate 3,
Hmm.
the D&D video game, even that, like you can go back to your saved game. If there was a
Yep.
consequence and I find myself cheating all the time on Baldur's Gate, and it's kind of great that when you're actually at the table, you don't get to do that because you have to deal with the consequences of your
Yep.
actions. You have to deal with that low dice roll. Your character has no other choice but to be resilient. There is no safe. And I think
Hmm.
that takes you to places, it forces you to go to places with that character and that story that I voluntarily take myself to.
Yeah. It's God, there's no saves coming in tabletop RPGs. You can't. Although, I mean, once in a while, I will say, like, I reserve I don't know the rule off the top of my head. I reserve the right to be wrong and get it right next time. But if something happens story wise, you just let it go. Like, there's even things where you get something wrong with the rules, and if you're playing with people who trust each other in a good way, like, no, that should stay. That's our history together. We don't let's not retcon that. Let's let it stand and let that be the story that we're telling together. Um,
That's camaraderie. That's
yeah.
tabletop brotherhood.
How
Well, I
don't you
know
dare
we're
to
yeah, don't you that is the bond in a party. That
yeah,
is the bond in a party.
don't take my tragic character death away from me though.
We've already cried for 3 days.
Yes. Okay. And I'm working it into my novel, damn it. I'm not gonna take it. So,
Goodness. Well, I know we've got a little more time. So what I really wanted to pick your brain about, like my favorite question, what I've been really curious on, is we've been talking about tabletop role-playing games, we've been talking about writing books. You write books about tabletop role-playing games, and then you have made tabletop role-playing adventures based on your books. So can you tell me about like what it's been like to square this circle in your writing, both as a game master and a fiction author, and what that experience has been like for you?
oh, it's fun. So I didn't actually intend to have them cross the streams. I wrote because I write these little one shots, these little mini stories for the Indestructible series, really just to give to readers as thank yous. I started writing. I was like, well, what if my superhero characters got stuck in a cursed TTRPG? Like, make it, um, uh, God, my niece referred to it as, so it's like, superheroes meet Jumanji. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of it. Like, and that people liked it so much. I'm like, okay, I can't leave them in the game. They have a whole world that they've got to go save. So like, and it was a lot of fun to write. So I'm like, what if regular people get pulled into the same cursed game? And unlike the superheroes, like for us, like what if we like it better in there? Like what if we don't want to go home? Like it's more fun to be a hero in this magical world than it is to go back to like being a bartender or whatever, like whatever life you left behind. Um, and I end up taking, and I always thought, oh, my DMing is separate from my writing, but well, no, now I'm stealing like worlds, I'm stealing pantheons, I'm stealing NPCs that I like a lot. I'm stealing a lot of geography I'll take from that, and just a lot of inspiration from what happens with the improvisation. And then when it goes into the books, then it becomes solidified for me. And then sort of that's when the cement hardens a bit. Like, um, but also I still keep it separate. It's almost like alternate timelines. In the timeline where my player's heart, everything is still fluid and I can change it. I solidify some of it on the actual novel side, with the dungeon crawlers. but I'm also writing it in a way where they're discovering the world the way players do. Um, and not everything necessarily has to make sense because it's a game. It's not, there's only so much physics that can be realistic in I don't know, it's almost like Looney Tune physics for TTRPGs. And trying to find that balance between consequences that real people in a game, their lives are at risk, um, versus wouldn't all of us kind of really enjoy to be being a sorcerer someday instead of, you know, I love being a writer and editor, but once in a while it would kind of be fun to be a professional barbarian, wouldn't it? Like it just
Yeah,
kind of,
yeah. I think this often. I think this very often. Um, and I love what you like talking about the fluidity and the mechanics. And I love what you said about perspective too, that you go in with the Dungeon Crawlers, which is the series of novellas that you do based off of this TTRPG game, which I'm very excited for to read more of them. Um, that the players don't know everything going
Mhm.
in, and they're discovering it, and it's completely from their perspective, and of course it doesn't make sense from their perspective. You get into the strange world, and people are shooting lightning from their hands and like bringing clouds of cows down on top of people's heads. Like it's not going to make sense. And how do you that world building, how do you parcel out the rules and the parameters, the magic systems, the pantheons, the limits? Are you using mana, or are you using spell slots? Are there HP? Is there a power bar? What are the limits of your strength and your intelligence that these characters in this new world have to discover that for themselves?
Yeah,
I
that's actually I was just having a conversation with another writer about that the other day about how the crunchiness of games versus you almost want to be a little less prescriptive. Depending on your world style, you might want to be less prescriptive in your fantasy storytelling. And how do you balance the two of like how do you keep things like magic or pantheons or anything have the mystery of being you almost don't want the audience to understand too much right away because the more rules you have, first of all, you're locked in, but second of all, you kind of take away some of the mystery. There's almost, well, okay, so I know this is 10d8 damage. Like that's very specific. And one of the reasons why I avoid there's the whole subgenre of lit RPG. I don't really fall into that. It's definitely more of it's about a game, but not necessarily following actual game mechanics because I wanted to keep it loosey goosey. But playing games actually, when you're doing the world building, which is the hardest part of anything, right? Like getting some consistency in your world building. If you start with a mechanic, that kind of gives you the training wheels to have some rules for the world you're building in the book. And then you can tweak them when you get there. Like, that's a little too crunchy, or that's a little too vague. And kind of it's you're beta testing you're beta testing magic for your own setting in a way by playing around the table. And I definitely have stolen like a couple of hated NPCs to put them in the dungeon crawlers from my tabletop game. There's a school that they go to that I had actually written a whole I gave it away on my website too. It's just like a little here's a unproblematic magic school kind of thing if anybody needs it. Just 15 pages per setting. Um, Stole that wholesale for my own book. And even when I was professionally DMing for a podcast, I'm like, what can I take from my setting that I know works because it becomes your toolkit as a writer. Like I've got this in my backpack for any time I need it. And then that makes the storytelling easier on the improv. That's improving gets easier the more you know about what you've got because you can kind of wing it. You're familiar with it already, which I think helps a lot.
Well, and how do you keep track of all of it? Like you're acquiring all these. I run into the issue often where like I give my players something, or I totally forgot. And okay, in my own defense, like we hadn't played this game in months, but I totally forgot. Um, my cleric, I had given the cleric a cursed reliquary with a hand that opens with some sort of like limitless maw, and items just kind of whatever you feed the hand just kind of disappears into it. And I totally forgot that I had given him that item. And then he brings it up, and I'm like, oh, yeah, you have Cursed Magic Hand. Totally forgot.
Oh, I am bad at if it leaves I've got my own notes for what I remember, but if I give something to the players, I'm like, you're gonna have to keep track of that because I can't. Once it
Your
leaves
job.
my yeah, it's offloaded from my brain. It's your responsibility now. But I am notoriously bad. I think I expected to write one book and be done. And yeah, now I'm, I don't know, 15 in, and I am so bad at keeping track of my own notes that I actually had to put out a bounty on a name for a business. I got on social media. I could not remember the name of a publication that had written about, like, in world had written about the characters. And I'm like, I will send a physical copy of whatever book from my library or my backlog that or back catalog that you want personalized to you or to the person of your choice. If somebody can tell me what I named this newspaper, and it worked, but I'm like, that's how, like, I really should have been better from the start about building an encyclopedia. Pro tip for writers: take good notes of your own stuff if you're going to write more than one book. Um,
And that's the
but
thing about like being a GM. If you hang a gun, like so many writers, and I myself am guilty of this. You hang a Chekhov's gun. Yeah,
mhm.
Chekhov famously said, you hang a gun in Act One, you need to fire it by Act Three. I get sloppy as a DM, and then my players start firing the guns that I forgot I gave to them, and I'm like, oh gosh, I totally need to incorporate the super powerful magical item that I gave you, and I totally forgot about. It.
It's
Keeps you
the
on your feet.
the frequency with which I forget. I'm okay in a tabletop at home game never firing Chekhov's gun because sometimes the players get on a Spelljammer spaceship and fly away and like, oh well, you're not even on the same world as the gun that we hung on the wall before. I think that's something that I think if you're taking an inspiration from your gaming and then building into your writing, that actually helps you figure out where to put Chekhov's gun. Like, okay, so if I know I took all this inspiration from the improvised game, now I can start laying down things that I can use later because I know where the story's going because I've been there already.
Yes,
As opposed to, I am totally okay with abandoning plot points because they just go in, they go in the island of misfit toys for later. And because the thing you always got to remember is it's not just your story. When you're a novelist, that is your story. It's all yours. You're in charge of a world, and but with the tabletop gaming, you might be the GM, but you're definitely not the only storyteller. And you got to respect that agency and that empower the people to tell the story that they want to tell too. So if you never get around to hitting those plot points that you had really wanted to tell, just save them for later. It's okay. You can make use of them later if they never open that door with that thing that was going to be. I do taunt my players at the end of a campaign like, you never found such and such.
I do the same thing.
But he's like, there was a what? Yeah, that was there waiting for you
Like,
if you'd
but you
ever.
didn't do the thing that I honestly. But that is so beautifully put. You're not the only storyteller at the table. Like Matthew, we are running out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. And honestly, I don't think we could end any better than what you just said. So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your insight. Really appreciate having you on for this panel. It's been great.
This is like I said, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm really glad you suggested it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what people have to say to us about this and hear their experiences and their questions.
Yeah, I could talk for like 5 more hours, which is why I was being very conscientious because I know myself. So, you guys listening at home, let's talk more. Let's keep the conversation going. Please hit us up in the chat. Let's keep the dialogue. What do you want to know about TTRPGs? What do you want to know about writing? What thoughts and or wisdom, golden brain nuggets do you have to share with everybody else? If you are interested further in this topic, we do have a Word Nerd Cafe episode 75, storytelling in gaming, storytelling in gaming, and RPGs as ensemble cast stories. I remember that being a particularly salient episode. Making characters and conflict with Dungeons and Dragons alignment chart. That was in the 2023 WriteHive conference, and I was totally like not in that one, but now I'm going to go back and watch it because it sounds amazing. So Matthew, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. All of you guys tuning in at home, thank you so much for being here. And let's keep this chat going.
Sounds good.